What are you doing? Watching football? Great. Awesome. Wonderful. But more entertaining when you got a little something on the line. Talking for weeks and weeks and weeks. MyBookie.ag is the place to go, whether you're an expert or a rookie. Here's what you do. Bet single games. Great. Over-unders. Yeah. Fade the spread. Yeah. But if you want to win a lot, parlay that mofo. Pick 3 teams to win. Hit all 3. Turn $100 into 600. That's how you roll. MyBookie is the one bet I know you'll be happy with all year long. Recommending these guys. Great sponsors. Use them before they even came on board as sponsors because they're the best in the business. Rock solid reputation. Great reviews online. And now, if you sign up this week, MyBookie will give you a 50% deposit bonus to jumpstart your bank roll. Also, make sure to follow at BetMyBookie on Twitter, Instagram, because they'll respond to every single @ and DM, unlike other people. And to mention, they've given away nearly $10,000 to their followers this football season. Hit them up. Log on to MyBookie right now. Don't miss out your last opportunity to collect the bonus. Use promo code FTW. You'll get your first deposit matched 50%. That's right. Promo code FTW. You play, you win, you get paid.
And whose team is this? Is this your team, or is this your daddy's team?
Thanks for listening to the Dad Mode Podcast, common sense parenting in a politically correct world. Here's your host, Andy Carlson.
Welcome back to the Dad Mode Podcast, common sense parenting, politically correct world. I'm your host, Andy Carlson, at Andy Carlson Show on the Twitter machine. I'm a father, no idea what I'm doing, but either they're chiefy, so I was trying to learn something together today. Website is dadmodepod.com. If you want to tweet us, tweet at dadmode, or just use the hashtag dadmode. It's great. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving out there. So we got to talk about this. I forget if we've covered this in depth before. I think we probably have when the original OG Adrian Peterson child abuse stories came up. But because he's Adrian and he can't stand like a week where the intention isn't all on him. So he's talking with Bleacher Report this week. Good friend Master Tisfatzian doing some great things with Bleacher Report. He also worked. He covered Washington for a couple of years, so he's got some good times with the team. And of course, he was here in Minnesota with Adrian, so they have a pretty good rapport. And Master was doing a piece about how Adrian is doing it at such an advanced age, and that was basically the premise of the article. But what came out in it is Adrian not off the record, not in a gotcha journalism angle from Master, in just a throwaway quote that made into the article, which it definitely should have. Adrian admitting that he still beats his kids with a belt, or still punishes his kids with a belt, even after the entire child abuse switch. If you don't follow sports, and if you just listen to the show for dad advice, why? Nah, just kidding. But it was 2014. Adrian Peterson had charges brought against him for child abuse after he punished one of his kids by hitting them with jamming leaves down their throat so they couldn't yell and scream, and hitting them repeatedly with a switch, which is like a thin tree branch, like basically like if you're making your own fishing pole, that sort of bend, that sort of. So just imagine that against the flesh of a young child, and he left lacerations on the kid's scrotum and all that stuff. Like it's very tough. It was a very tough incident. He ended up pleading no contest there. Went through counseling and yada yada yada. And the way that things usually go, I mean, time passes, and then people forgave Adrian. Also, being an athlete will give you an extra leeway. Well, if you're a good athlete, it'll give you extra leeway for people to bend their morals and be like, oh, it's how he was raised. That's other things. It's like how Michael Vick is back in the league and is like an accepted figure now. But argument for another day. So every time this whole thing comes up, and it happened really big time in 2014, was the subject of spanking, the subject of corporal punishment. And what it turns into is this giant-ass game of King of the Mountain. of I was beaten by my parents and I didn't turn out to be a serial killer, so it must be fine. And, well, no. Person A will be like, yeah, I was spanked and it turned out fine. And then person B was like, yeah, well, I was spanked with a switch like Adrian and I turned out fine. And the other person will be like, I was whipped with an electrical cord and then also I was maced repeatedly by my parents and I turned out fine. And it goes on like that. It's so weird to me. It almost turns into like a badge of pride. It almost turns into like people bragging about stories of survival. It's like the one Donner from the Donner Party that made it out. Just like brag as like, what's up? Yeah, I made it. I had to eat people, but I'm here. I don't know. Like you go on the interwebs, especially Twitter, and Twitter overall is pretty progressive leaning. But when it comes to stuff like this, like the old school side definitely comes out. And it just gets so anecdotal and narcissistic of, well, I was spanked as a child, so I turned out fine. Yeah, but what about the people who don't turn out fine? What about the people that populate the prison system? What about the people who are just doing heinous things over and over again? What about the people who have mental issues? Like, is there a strong correlation between spanking, corporal punishment there, them as a child, borderline abuse, and then straight up abuse? Probably. So maybe the person who was beaten as a kid with a stick turning out to be a normal contributing member of society, maybe that's the exception. Maybe that's a rare case. Who knew? Yeah. And my take is, every parent's different. Every kid is different. Every situation is different. Parents were all brought up in different ways, different cultures, different regions of the country. So I say whatever, as long as you're not like crossing over the line into actual like child abuse, which it's tough to draw the line nowadays. Whatever you do. I'm not here to tell you how to raise your kids, but also, I mean, the fact that I'm not going to spank my kids, in all likelihood, it's. I don't need you saying that's like, well, I was beat as a kid, and I turned out fine. Because I grew up, I got spanked, yeah, and it was mainly. It wasn't to the level like there was definitely not props involved. Like there was no sticks, there was no belts, there was no anything like that. And I think if you go back multiple generations, like 2-3 generations, I mean, belts was pretty commonplace. I mean, that's the whole shtick and stereotype of the dad. Don't get me. I'm gonna go get the belt if you quit acting up. But for me, like getting spanked, it was hand, rear end, that whole thing. Usually, it was basically until I was like maybe 6. Yeah, and it was reserved for times when super acting out of line. Yeah, so I understand that premise. But since I have a daughter now, like I'm never going to spank her or future daughters we may have, because I understand, and I never want to normalize with them that it's okay for a man to put their hands on them in a violent manner. Now, boys, our future sons, I mean, that'll be different, because I know it's extremely hot take right now, but, boys are different than girls, men are different than women, but not going down that path. But here's the thing. Like, if the kid is sort of like me, when I was growing up, there may be a spanking or two in there. But if they're just like a normal kid, probably not, right? And I don't know. Like, I do see... I see the value in the specter or the threat of spanking on the horizon, but then also you'll get super progressive parents being like, well, actually, you're trying to intimidate your children with the threat of physical violence is just as bad as physical violence. And I'm like, okay, sure, yeah. But this is a very deep topic. But I just want to add a little bit of levity, because if you love this show most of the time, when we're just goofing around. You're going to love That's Gold with Steven Heitner, because you may know Steve, if you are a Seinfeld fan, as Jerry's annoying comedian friend, Kenny Bania, who coined the term, "That's gold, Jerry." On That's Gold, Steve is joined by co-host Rich Johnson to talk about everything guys love: sports betting, movies, comedy, food, drink, music, Vegas, and more 5 days a week. It's like having a convo. Some of your best buddies at the bar. It's great. A bar where famous guests often show up to shoot the breeze. Check out That's Gold with Steven Heitner on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I always love that guy. I always love that guy from the show. All right, back into the shits. I do think that there is, with anything, people like to get binary with spanking, where it's either you don't touch your child at all or it's complete physical abuse. Whereas in reality, there is a spectrum. Like if you're, once in a while, like the kid darts out into traffic when you specifically tell them not to, and they put themselves in harm's way, then a pooch on the backside, a little swat there. I think that's, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being child abuse, 0 being nothing, it's probably like a 3 or a 4. Using a belt, that's going to be a 7. And what Adrian did to his child, that's going to be like a 15. Yeah. So there's never any room for nuance in this conversation, which, spanking and a lot of child rearing issues, frankly, are basically like any political issue or like abortion and like that. People already have their opinions. People already have their preconceived biases, and there's 0.00001% chance that you're going to get someone to change their mind or change their stance. So, and also, anytime that there's an attempt to be a civil discussion, like it always devolves, right? And I do understand and empathize that this, the sort of Adrian Peterson corporal punishment is deeply rooted in the African American community and also in the South. So I understand that there's a lot of nature versus nurture involved here. Pardon the pun. But going back down the rabbit hole, it goes back to African American slaves trying to keep their children in line, because kids, even young kids acting out back then, could be the difference between life or death, or also just an extreme, terrible punishment at the hands of the slaveholders. Like, what I'm going to give my child here is much less than what could be. So I understand the historical roots there, but also it's like culture, subsequent generations. What does that have to do with 2018? I mean, I empathize, commiserate with it fully. And especially like that's how they're raised. It's sort of like you have an older relative that has, we'll say ancient, archaic notions about the world, and you understand it's like that's how they were raised. That's how they were brought in. Like those were the social norms at the time. But I think we've gotten to the place now where, spanking is, trying to choose words very carefully. Like spanking. Open hand spanking, fine. Using props on the kid, like and using that as a routine discipline measure, I think that's beyond the pale. I do think it is, and it's tough. Whereas if you're the type of parent that constantly resorts to hitting your kid, whether it be throwing hands, whether it be with a belt, whether it be with a stick, whether it be with whatever prop is around. And if you're doing that routinely, then I think that's more on you, because you're not using everything at your disposal to deter the kid from that behavior. So you're just resorting to your physical size advantage. Like, again, I'm not telling you how to raise your kids, but to me, that just doesn't compute. And also, the original Adrian thing wasn't that the kid, it wasn't the kid doing something especially heinous. Like he shoved one of his other siblings off of a video game, and then that happened. The whole beating with the tree branch. So I would hate to know what the kid would be punished if he actually did something like really bad. That's why I want to know. Whereas, I mean, young kids, you're not going to spank you're likely not going to be spanking a 10-year-old, right? So spanking, this sort of physical abuse, is going to be limited to, I don't know, 7 and under, 8 and under. Sure. What's the IQ of an 8-year-old? It's like a potato. So if you can't outsmart, cajole, strategize against a potato, and you have to resort to physical violence, I think that's sort of on you. I think it really is. And I don't buy into we don't spank our kids now, so that's why that they're a soft generation. Well, I think there's a lot more factors in there than that. I think that the kids are growing up in very easy times. I think that's a contributing factor. I think that parents being more coddling and also being more helicopter parents as opposed to previous generations, that definitely plays in as well. And then and also just like the softening of society in general. Like, kids aren't allowed to be rough and tumble. Kids aren't allowed to be tough anymore. They seem that as toxic nowadays. So I think that's far more of contributing factors than, hey, we can't beat our kids anymore, so that's why they're soft. I think that's too reductive reasoning for my taste. But I don't know what we accomplished here. I really don't. Like, I just, it's a very complicated issue, and it's one where people aren't going to change their minds, and I fully do not expect this episode to change anyone's mind. Whether you spank your kid, whether you never touch your kid, whether whatever. But I do think that as a parent, even if you're tired, even if you're working several jobs, even if you're doing all of those things, that there are other ways to discipline your child and to get them to behave in a proper manner rather than just smacking them. I don't know. That's my 2 cents. Yeah, sorry for this heavier episode, but it is the topic du jour, and just had to say my piece and get it out there. Yeah, tell a friend, spread the word. I promise you the other episodes are much more entertaining. Show's available on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, pretty much wherever you get podcasts. And give us a follow on Twitter at DadModePod. Me and Andy Carlson Show. Website is dadmodepod.com. But until next time, be a man, be a father, go dad mode, and we'll smell you later.
Think the episode you just heard is worth $1? Well, send it our way. Visit dadmodepod.com/support to find out how. Be a man, be a father. Go dad mode. The music is created and produced by Deeb. To hear more of his tracks, visit soundcloud.com/Deeb.